Secretary of State John Kerry, he's in France today speaking out against the terror attacks carried out at the Charlie Hebdo newspaper. Now, Kerry, he called the attacks a living nightmare. He also went on to say that he wanted to share a hug with the whole of Paris and the whole of France. The visit comes as officials in France are cracking down on those speaking out in support of terrorism, not necessarily attached to it, affiliated, or anywhere else, but nonetheless pledging their support to those horrific attacks. Now, a man who hit a car while driving drunk, he praised the gunman who carried out the attack while he was being arrested. He then was sentenced to 4 years in prison. Interesting voices coming out on this. Pope Francis, for example, he spoke out this week. He condemned the attacks like everyone else, and he also called freedom of expression a fundamental human right. He also said that it is wrong, however, to insult the faiths of others, and many people thought that possibly the newspaper, while certainly not warning what the horrific attacks that ensued out of it, but that in many ways in insulting faith, the faith leaders went too far. However, what we're talking about specifically now, guys, is this isn't firing a crowded theater. This is specifically supporting the acts of terrorism, not with money, not with raising arms, but in praising those attacks. Should that be criminalized?
No, I don't think so. And I think it's important that we say that we're talking about in the U.S. I mean, we can't control how other parts of the world
in
act.
the U.S.
But in the U.S., I think no. But I think there's a really important conversation that has not come up enough on the free speech issue. Just because you have the right to say something doesn't mean you say it. And there are things that are offensive. I mean, I would go take up arms to defend Andrew's right to say something, but there are some things that should not be said. And there's just a basic decorum and a human courtesy and the social contract that each of us has to sign, in our whole, souls and minds, that you don't say certain things that are hurtful to people.
David
but
Brooks,
you can.
David
but
Brooks
you can.
talked about the little kid table, the kids table, and the adult table. He got some heat for it, but I'm more with him than I'm not. I want to protect the right to say it, but I feel just because you can,
you don't have to say it.
So many people do that. Just because you can do something, it doesn't mean you should. But that said, Dominic, after World War II, after the Holocaust, in Germany, in the reconstructed Germany, it was illegal to print or say something anti-Semitic or to praise in any way Nazis or anything along those lines, because they figured unless there was an absolute line, they ran the risk of going back to the ugly days. And that, in effect, is what we're talking about here. Do you think by drawing a line to say you can't say it, let alone do it, we're going down a slippery slope and then who knows what happens next? Or do you think, hey, you know what? There's no defense for what they're saying right now. So, yeah, this is like crying fire in a crowded theater.
I don't think you should have the right to say anything you want. We're talking about Paris. So I don't think anybody should be online praising the attacks. And I feel that if you are doing so, it should at least warrant a second eye from law enforcement looking at your postings. Because let's be honest, what's more of a threat now worldwide? Is it the big attacks or the ones where it's only a couple of people? And you just can't go around saying not in this day and age, not in 2015, when, many of us have traveled around the world, when you can walk into a pizza shop or a Sbarro or whatever you call it in Israel and a bomb goes off or whatever the case may be. You can't just go around saying anything you want. And specifically, Richard, if you post a picture online showing someone firing a firearm into an NYPD car, I don't think that's free speech. I think you should be arrested, charged, and before a judge in this climate.
Again, to be clear, and I know you clarified this, but it bears repeating. We're not talking about somebody who's encouraging violence, and we're not even somebody who says, like, you should come join ISIS. Like, that should not be encouraged.
Somebody saying I supported the attacks.
Right. I think not only should that be permitted, I think it's important to hear that sort of information. And I want to take us back to late September or early November 2001. After the attacks, there were people who got in a lot of trouble for saying, here's why the attackers hate us. Here's some of the mindset that they might have had. And it's important to understand the people who hate you and why they think the way that they do. Otherwise, you can never understand the circumstances that led to it or how to prevent it. And I think it stems an important conversation that people need to have. I also just think that free speech is so inviolate
But I want to just ask
on
you,
its own.
don't you, the example you raised, even if I disagree with it, at least there was a thoughtful approach that somebody was trying to say. This is just praising and supporting an atrocity. Isn't there a distinction?
There's an individual distinction in terms of how we see it, in terms of how people process it, but in terms of the free speech element, I don't think there's a difference, because people's, in this case, what I would say, we would all say, people's stupidity in this regard needs to be exposed for what it is, or that you see the Charlie Hebdo cover so that you can see how stupid the attack on Charlie Hebdo was and how it doesn't make any sense, how what offends some people would not lead other people to actually go into the attack. I think these things need to be out in the open. There's no way to protect yourself. There's also no way to cut it off. You can't say, well, this stuff is above board and this stuff is below the line.
I want to disagree with him, but I can't, because I think of the following. To me, and to all of us I know, Newtown, it was just such a gut punch in that everybody of us immediately thought to our own situations, and oh my God, if somebody posted something saying, I wish there were more, or something horrible, let's not even get into the language of it, I'd want horrible things to happen to that person. But I think that if we lock somebody up for saying that, then I don't know where it ends.
You look at the guy in Saudi Arabia now with the 1,000 lashes. I mean, they did 50, put him in the hospital, and they're going to bring him back and finish him off. I mean, it just shows the stark difference between the U.S. and other parts of the world. I completely agree with you. The ACLU, I'm not the greatest fan of, but I've always admired that they support the right of Nazis and Klansmen to march, as much as I want to throw a wrench at the Klansmen coming by. But they take that line in the sand. I think someone's got to do that in the U.S.
Richard, in this day and age, all of this First Amendment stuff, it sounds great. Sounds fantastic, but law enforcement has a job to do.
You said, though, two different things are done. You said something before, that if somebody puts that posting out there, that then they'll be on the radar of law enforcement.
Right.
I don't disagree with you, okay? Where we're only maybe parting company, I'm not even sure we do, is does it end there, or does it keep going where there should be a criminalization because of their language? And trust me, I'd say something to that guy if I knew the person who said it, and I tell him what I really think of him. But I don't think that person goes to jail because they're speaking. And if you think about it, without doing the Pollyannish, why did everybody come to this place in the first place, right? It's because they want to get around the persecution and stuff. They wanted to go to a place where we could say, practice, and do whatever we want. Even the despicable idiots out there who do that. But trust me, I think they're going to have a few people following all their comments. I think that much we all agree on. All right. When we come back here, another hot button issue, guns. But in this particular case, a specific incident this week in Texas. Gun rights activists in Texas, they had a rally on Tuesday, but it went to a whole nother level, where now lawmakers are asking for panic buttons in their offices because it got so out of hand. We'll show you what we're talking about. But as we go to break, here's a look at our still life photo of the day, and it comes out of Cuba, where you can see a miniature U.S. and Cuban flag side by side representing the new trade and travel agreement that took effect today. We'll be right back.